You know, there's this common misconception that when a woman lets a man go, she's giving up, that somehow walking away means she's lost the battle, emotionally, relationally, or even mentally. But the truth, the absolute, often unspoken truth is this: letting go is not weakness. It is one of the most powerful, courageous, and emotionally intelligent acts a woman can make. Think about it. Our culture often conditions women to hold on, to fix, to prove their worth through endurance. Stick it out, they say. Don't give up on love. But here's where things take a psychological turn. The moment a woman chooses to let go, not out of spite or anger, but from a place of deep clarity and self-respect, something shifts, not just in her, but in the man who once had access to her love. You see, men are wired to pursue. It's primal, but pursuit isn't just about the chase. It's about meaning. When everything comes easy, it loses its weight. And when a woman constantly bends, sacrifices, and tries to explain her love, her value, her presence, it becomes background noise. But when she removes herself from that equation, the silence becomes deafening. Suddenly, her absence forces reflection. Her letting go rewrites the entire narrative of who she is. Now, let's go deeper. Letting go isn't about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's about self-preservation and self-possession. It's about knowing when your presence is being undervalued and making the conscious decision to stop handing out discounts on your worth. That takes strength, emotional strength, mental resilience, and ironically, it's in that strength where she finally chooses herself, that the man begins to see her with new eyes. Psychologically, when someone walks away from us, especially when we assumed they never would, it disrupts our ego. It challenges our belief in how much control we had, and this disruption is what often triggers a man's deepest emotional response. Not while she's there, pleading for him to understand, but when she's no longer available to be understood. It's in her absence that he starts to hear her, not because she said anything differently, but because she's no longer speaking. He sees the texts she no longer sends, hears the laughter that's no longer directed at him, and feels the warmth that's no longer waiting on the other end of the phone. The woman who once gave him everything has now chosen peace over persuasion, and that changes everything. There's also a philosophical beauty in it. Letting go is an act of surrender, but not to him, to life. It's trusting that you don't have to beg to be chosen. It's believing that the right energy doesn't need to be forced. And when a man witnesses a woman choosing herself over the illusion of control, he begins to understand that she wasn't weak for loving him, and she isn't cold for leaving. She's wise for knowing when enough is enough. That kind of strength is rare, and rare things, they're remembered. They haunt the mind long after the moment is gone. So no, letting go isn't weakness, it's clarity in motion. It's strength that doesn't scream, it simply walks away, and in that quiet exit it says everything. Remember this: a woman who walks away with grace becomes the standard he compares everyone else to. There's something haunting about silence, something piercing, especially when it comes from someone who used to give you their full emotional presence. When a woman finally stops talking, when she stops explaining, arguing, or reaching out, that silence doesn't offer clarity. It creates craving, it stirs questions, not answers, and for a man who once felt sure of her, that silence becomes unbearable. You see, when we talk about emotional connection, we often overlook the role of absence, but absence, real, intentional absence, isn't just space. It's a mirror, and for men, it reflects everything they've missed, ignored, or dismissed. The moment a woman lets go and falls silent, she no longer feeds the ego. She no longer gives him the daily reminder that she's there, waiting, hoping. And in that stillness, he hears her louder than ever before. Now, let's get into the psychology of it. The human mind is wired to assign value to what's scarce, not what's constant. Familiarity might bring comfort, but scarcity brings focus. While she's there, accessible, available, predictable, her presence becomes background noise. But when she's gone, that space she used to fill becomes an echo chamber. He doesn't hear her words anymore. He hears the lack of them. He doesn't feel her touch. He feels the chill of where she used to be. And that's the moment craving begins. Not because he suddenly became a better man, not because something magically shifted in his character, but because silence interrupted the cycle. And silence, when it comes from someone who once cared deeply, is unsettling. It forces reflection and often regret. A man begins to realize he no longer has the emotional certainty he once enjoyed. He can't predict her reaction. He doesn't know if she's still thinking about him. He starts replaying conversations, scanning old texts, interpreting old glances. Was she serious when she said that? Did I miss the signs? Was she already slipping away while I thought I had her? That craving is a product of emotional dissonance, the brain trying to resolve the gap between what was and what is. It's no longer about love at that point. It's about loss, the kind of loss that makes a man feel smaller, not because she punished him, but because she removed herself. She didn't slam the door, she didn't leave in chaos. She disappeared in peace, and that peace disturbs the very foundation of his ego. Now here's the deeper truth. When a woman lets go and stops fighting for something that's hurting her, she shifts the dynamic entirely. She becomes a mystery, no longer emotionally accessible, no longer emotionally predictable, and for many men, that mystery becomes obsession. Because the more emotionally invested she was, the more shocking her silence feels. He expected her to keep trying. He didn't expect her to walk away and stay gone. There's power in that restraint. Not the kind that seeks revenge or attention, but the kind that says, asterisk, I've said all I need to say. My silence is my boundary, asterisk and boundaries. They leave a lasting impression, especially on people who never expected to be held accountable for how they made someone feel. So when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop making your presence feel like a privilege he can take for granted, you become unforgettable, not because of the noise you made, but because of the peace you left behind. Let him sit with the silence. Let him feel the craving, because sometimes silence doesn't bring closure. It brings realization. One of the most profound human experiences is realizing the value of something only after it's gone. This isn't just a romantic cliché. It's a deep psychological truth that plays out over and over again in our relationships. Men, in particular, often don't fully grasp the emotional wealth a woman brings into their lives until she is no longer part of it. And that realization doesn't happen in her presence. It happens in the void she leaves behind when a woman chooses to walk away, not in anger, but in self-respect. She creates a vacuum. That vacuum isn't just about physical absence. It's emotional. It's energetic. It's a space that used to be filled with her kindness, her understanding, her effort. The everyday ways she showed she cared, checking in, listening, making him feel seen, suddenly vanish. And it's in that emptiness that the weight of her value begins to sink in. You see, consistency is often invisible. When someone is always there, showing up, being dependable, we stop noticing the effort it takes to be that way. Love becomes routine, appreciation fades, and comfort quietly turns into complacency, until one day she's not there anymore. She's not calling, she's not texting, she's not waiting. That's when a man feels it, not just her absence, but his own negligence. The human brain adjusts to what it believes it will always have. It creates mental shortcuts. She's not going anywhere. She'll forgive me again. She'll understand. She always does. That narrative gives permission to coast, to stop trying. But when that narrative breaks, when she no longer reacts the way she used to, his mind scrambles to understand what changed. And what changed is her. She didn't become bitter. She became aware, aware that her emotional labor was being taken for granted. Aware that love, when not returned with the same intensity, becomes self-betrayal, and so she stepped back. She stopped pouring into a space that only echoed emptiness. This moment, this absence becomes his awakening. Suddenly, he remembers all the little things, the emotional safety she gave him, the calm she brought into his chaos, the way her presence made life softer, even if he never said it out loud. Her worth, which once felt so constant, now feels irreplaceable. And that's where the fall begins, not while she's standing in front of him waiting to be chosen, but when she's already gone and he realizes he was chosen all along, and he wasted it. That guilt, that clarity, that longing, it cuts deeper than any argument ever could, because he now sees what he had and knows it may never come back. This is not about revenge. It's not about teaching him a lesson. It's about recognizing that sometimes you have to remove yourself to remind someone of your worth. Not by punishing them, but by choosing peace over pain, silence over struggle, self-worth over sacrifice. There's an old saying, you never miss the water till the well runs dry, and in relationships, women often are that well. Deep, nurturing, sustaining. But even a well needs to be protected. Because when it runs dry, it doesn't just affect the one who lost it. It forces them to learn what they never took the time to understand. So let the void speak for you. Let your absence teach what your presence couldn't. Because when value is revealed through distance, it leaves a lesson that echoes long after you're gone. There's a powerful shift that happens in a man's mind when a woman who once gave him everything chooses to give him nothing, not out of anger, but from quiet resolve. That shift is psychological. It's not instant. It's gradual, creeping in like a fog he didn't know he'd have to walk through. And by the time he realizes what he's feeling, it's already consuming him. What we often don't talk about is how predictable emotional comfort can dull desire. When a woman constantly shows up, explains herself, offers love even when it's not reciprocated, a man can become emotionally complacent. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's unconscious. He adjusts to her efforts. He assumes her presence. He stops noticing the little things because he's gotten used to them being there. But when that rhythm is interrupted, when she suddenly doesn't reply the way she used to, doesn't reach out, doesn't wait, it shocks his system. What he thought was guaranteed is now uncertain. That uncertainty, that's what creates the shift from comfort to curiosity. And curiosity in love is powerful. It breeds focus, reflection, even obsession. He begins to ask himself questions he never asked before. What happened? Why did she change? Did I miss something? Is she gone for good? This psychological pivot creates emotional weight. The comfort he once felt in her love is now replaced by a mental loop he can't turn off. And the deeper that loop runs, the more he replays everything. He becomes hyper, aware of the things he once overlooked, the tone in her voice, the silence in her eyes, the moments she almost left but didn't. Now he's listening to memories that once felt irrelevant, but in hindsight they were warnings. There's something fascinating about the human ego. It thrives on certainty, but it grows obsessed with what it can't control. So, when she stops responding, when she no longer gives emotional cues, she becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is a psychological trigger. He can't categorize her anymore. She's no longer in the box he mentally placed her in. She's no longer the woman who waits, forgives, or explains. She's the woman who detached, the one who didn't just leave, but evolved, and here's where it deepens. Men often don't fall harder because a woman walked away. They fall harder because she no longer needs to be understood. Her silence, her peace, her decision not to fight any more these things signal something terrifying to the male psyche. She no longer needs me to validate her worth. That's the moment when the emotional shift becomes spiritual. She's no longer seeking love, she's embodying it. She's no longer proving anything, she's living in alignment. And men fall hard for that kind of power because it's rare. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, composed, grounded. It doesn't scream, "Look at me." It whispers, "I'm already gone." And that whisper echoes louder than any cry for attention ever could. This is why letting go, without noise, without warning, without bitterness, triggers a man's deepest emotional reckoning. Not because she broke him, but because she revealed him. She revealed the part of himself that took her for granted. The part that assumed he had time, the part that now lives with questions he might never get answers to. So remember, when you shift from needing to be heard to choosing not to explain, you move from emotional reaction to psychological power. And it's in that power that he begins to fall, not for who you were when you stayed, but for who you became when you walked away. Silence doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, but it speaks, and when it does, it changes everything. One of the most misunderstood ideas in relationships is that the more you give, the more you're valued. But that's not always how it plays out, especially when your giving is rooted in proving instead of being. And here's the truth many people avoid saying out loud. A woman's true power doesn't lie in how much she loves, pleads, or sacrifices. Her power is in her ability to walk away with grace, to detach with dignity, and to choose peace over performance. That's when men start to fall harder because suddenly the emotional balance shifts. When a woman no longer needs to convince anyone of her worth, she steps into her most magnetic state. There's something deeply attractive about a person who values themselves enough to say, "I won't keep showing up where I'm not truly seen." That decision, that boundary, is the essence of feminine power. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it doesn't fight to be chosen. It simply refuses to be overlooked, and that quiet refusal, it speaks volumes. You see, men often respond to emotional energy before they respond to logic. When you're over-explaining, over-giving, or trying to hold together a connection that's already falling apart, you're operating from lack. And lack, no matter how beautifully you dress it, doesn't inspire desire. It triggers survival. It makes you feel anxious, not appreciated. But when you shift from lack to self-anchoring, everything changes, because now you're not seeking validation. You are the validation. There's a psychological edge in that. The moment a woman no longer reacts emotionally to being ignored, disrespected, or undervalued, a man begins to wonder what she knows that he doesn't. What shifted in her mindset? Why is she no longer waiting? That mystery becomes magnetic, and what used to feel predictable now feels untouchable. The thing is, most men expect a certain pattern, especially when they've grown accustomed to your emotional availability. They expect you to keep texting after a disagreement, to be the first to reach out, to fix it. But when you break that pattern not as a tactic, but because you've genuinely outgrown it, it rattles their assumptions. It forces them to confront the version of you that doesn't need them, and that's the version they weren't prepared to meet. Power doesn't always look like dominance. In feminine energy, it looks like restraint. It looks like choosing not to react, not to beg, not to chase. It looks like knowing your presence is a gift, and removing it when it's no longer respected. And here's what's important. This isn't about playing games. This isn't about using silence or detachment as manipulation. This is about alignment. It's about honoring yourself so completely that staying in situations that shrink you is no longer an option. That kind of confidence doesn't need to scream, it just needs to be real. Men fall harder for the woman who chooses herself. Not because she abandoned him, but because she stopped abandoning herself. She stopped negotiating her value. She stopped waiting for potential to turn into consistency, and that internal shift creates an external gravity. A pull that doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. So if you're in that space, tired of explaining your heart, exhausted from trying to be enough, just know this: your power doesn't lie in how hard you hold on. It lies in how bravely you let go. Because when a woman rises from needing love to embodying it, she becomes unforgettable. And not because she chased anyone, but because she remembered she was never meant to. There's a strange truth about human nature, especially in love. We tend to want what we can't have. Or more accurately, we begin to appreciate deeply only after access is denied. And this becomes especially true when a man realizes that the woman who once opened her heart to him, completely and without reservation, is no longer reachable in the same way. It's in the withdrawal of her emotional availability that his feelings intensify, not because her love has changed, but because now he finally sees what it meant. When love is present, accessible, consistent, it can be taken for granted, not always intentionally. Sometimes we assume what's steady will always stay. We stop showing up with our full presence. We stop noticing the small, quiet ways love was being offered. We slip into comfort, and comfort, when unchecked, dulls appreciation. But when that same love pulls away, not to punish, but to protect itself, it awakens something that comfort never could: clarity. When a man loses access to what once nurtured him, challenged him, and held space for him, he doesn't just feel the absence. He feels the cost. He starts to retrace the moments he missed, the words he didn't hear, the emotions he never fully understood. And that retracing turns into realization. This is where the emotional paradox kicks in. The woman he once felt sure of becomes the one he can't stop thinking about, not because she changed, but because the door she once left open is now closed. What once felt familiar is now distant. What once felt secure now feels like a missed opportunity, and that shift doesn't just hurt, it haunts. And here's the deeper layer: love that's no longer accessible gains value, not because it wasn't valuable before, but because distance adds perspective. It's in the stillness, the silence, the no contact, that a man truly begins to feel the weight of what he lost. He sees how she held space for him when he was emotionally unavailable. He sees how she stayed patient when he was distracted, careless, or indifferent. And now he sees that love isn't waiting at the door anymore. But this isn't about revenge. It's not about making someone suffer. It's about understanding the role boundaries play in self-respect. When a woman decides that her love is no longer up for negotiation, that she will no longer keep giving to someone who only shows up halfway, she reclaims her power. And in doing so, she stops being an option. She becomes the memory that lingers, the standard that stays. This kind of emotional withdrawal forces a man to reflect not just on what she gave, but on who he was when she gave it. That's what makes him fall harder, not just for her, but for the version of himself he wishes he had been. And that emotional dissonance, that mix of longing and regret, is powerful because it doesn't just affect his heart. It rewires how he sees love altogether, Unavailable love teaches more than constant presence ever could. It teaches through absence. It teaches through the echo. It makes him realize that love isn't owed, it's earned. And once it's gone, no amount of chasing can recreate what was freely given, but never fully received. So, if you've ever wondered whether your silence, your distance, your decision to let go made a difference, understand this, it did. Because sometimes the loudest wake-up call is the one you never speak. Letting go doesn't mean you stopped loving. It means you stopped waiting to be loved the way you deserve, and in that decision you became unforgettable, not because he lost you, but because you finally chose you.